Would you take your Bibles and turn now to Genesis chapter 32 and 33 for our scripture reading this morning. Of course, we are reading only passages of a much larger narrative. And if you would like the backstory to our lessons for today, I would encourage you to begin reading at Genesis chapter 21 and read through chapter 36 sometime today or in the days to come. First, chapter 32, verses 3 through 8. Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir in the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have lived with Laban as an alien and stayed until now. And I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female slaves, and I have sent to tell my Lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies, thinking, if Esau comes to one company and destroys it, then the company that is left will escape. And then to chapter 33, verses 1 through 11. Now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. He put the maids with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on ahead of them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" And Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids drew near, and they and their children bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And finally, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all of this company that I have met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor with you, my lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please. If I find favor with you, then accept my present from my hand. For truly, to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have received me with such favor. Please accept my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have everything I want." So he urged him, and he took it. The word of the Lord for the people of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Families can get messy, real messy. Even the families that we find in the Bible. The family that we meet this morning, Isaac and Rebekah, with their twins, Esau and Jacob, is certainly an example of a dysfunctional family. And most families, however, I suspect all families, do enjoy their dysfunction. The dynamics in this family appear prime for dysfunction. Parental favoritism, sibling rivalry, clashing personalities, misunderstandings, manipulation, deception, anger, hostility, hatred, and the threat of violence, all in this family of 4. This morning we are dealing with a broken relationship between brothers, Esau and Jacob. According to Genesis, the competition between these 2 boys began in their mother's womb. They struggled together. The writer of Genesis 25 says, "And their mother despaired before they were even born." On the day that they were born, Esau emerged first, all red and hairy, with Jacob gripping tightly his heel. And the boys, as they grew, were as different as night and day. Esau was a man's man. He became a skilled hunter. He loved the outdoors and the thrill of the chase. But Jacob was the quiet one. Jacob preferred sleeping in a tent where he was safe and warm rather than out under the stars. And he preferred cooking what the others brought in from the hunt rather than hunting. Esau was impulsive, needy, a little overdramatic, and quite gullible. Jacob, on the other hand, was thoughtful, cunning, calculating, and decisive. Parental favoritism is another complicating factor in this family, in this relationship between brothers. For we are told that Isaac loved Esau, and Rebekah, well, she loved Jacob. To complicate matters even more, there was this messy little social contract in this ancient time, which stated that the firstborn child got the lion's share of whatever the father had accumulated in his lifetime, that the firstborn son, by reason of his birth, got to rule over his siblings. By far, by being born first, he was winner from day one. Now, you can imagine that this was bound to cause trouble in families. Trouble between brothers, and I suspect trouble even between brothers and sisters. But this certainly had to become a very thorny situation with twins like Jacob and Esau. And in this family, by the way, did I mention that this is a biblical family? This social contract is going to be challenged. You see, Isaac, the conservative one, is willing to honor the status quo. He will bless Esau, the firstborn. Rebekah, the more liberal one of the two, is going to challenge, for she's going to do whatever it takes to secure this blessing for her favorite son, Jacob. Apparently, as mothers sometimes do, she put this thought in Jacob's head quite early. For he manages to hoodwink Esau out of his birthright. Esau comes in from hunting. He's hungry. Jacob just happens to have a pot of simmering stew. Esau says, "Let me have some of that red stuff. I'm famished." Jacob replies, "First sell me your birthright." Esau says, "I am about to die. What good is a birthright if I'm dead?" Did I mention that Esau is a little overdramatic? And so there, that day, in that moment, Jacob stole Esau's birthright over a loaf of bread and some lentil stew. But truthfully, that is minor league in this history of consummate deception. Mother and favorite son devise a plan to deceive the old man Isaac so that Rebekah's favorite child Jacob receives the blessing and Isaac's favorite child Esau, well, Esau is going to be left out in the cold. It was an elaborate plan of deception, and Rebekah hatches that plan. Jacob deceives his father. Rebekah gets what she wants. Isaac is confused. Esau is distraught. And Jacob has to get on the run. After this elaborate deception in which Esau has lost the blessing to Jacob through his mother and brother's trickery, Esau makes a pledge to himself. You know, it won't be long before the old man is dead and gone. And then I will kill that lying, manipulating brother of mine. Esau, the Scriptures say, hates his brother for taking that blessing. Rebekah, remember, Jacob is her favorite. And she's going to do everything in her power to protect him. So she goes to Isaac and says, I think you should let Jacob go to my brother Laban in Haran because, you know, I just might go crazy, absolutely crazy, if Jacob marries one of these local Hittite girls. But Rebekah knows. She knows that day she has already lost one son, Esau, through her manipulation. And she is afraid that Esau, in his impulsiveness, will indeed kill his brother. Now, this tragic event of cunning and deception will hang over this family for about 20 years. A long time. Jacob will be in Haran, continuing his cunning and deceitful ways. You see, with Jacob, you may pull the wool over his eyes once, like on his wedding night, giving him the wrong sister as his bride, but he will get even quietly. Just give him time. And Esau, well, we really don't know what Esau did over these 20 years, except that he married a Canaanite woman to spite his mother. Did I mention that this is a biblical family? For 20 years or so, Jacob is haunted by his brother's threat. Buddy, when the old man dies, you're mine. And Jacob lives with the promise of his mother. When your brother gets over being mad at you and forgets what you have done to him, notice how she absolves her own responsibility. I will send for you. Well, Rebekah never sends for Jacob. And Jacob gets caught in his own trap of being deceitful with his uncle, and so he's on the run again, running back home toward Esau. Of course, after all these thousands of years, it's impossible for us to know what Jacob is thinking and feeling. But apparently, from what the writers of Genesis tell us, he is absolutely afraid of his brother. And he surmises in his own imagination that Esau has spent these last 20 years stoking his anger and planning his revenge. And he is convinced in his own mind that when they meet, there will be bloodshed of some kind. Remember, Jacob is cunning and deceitful, and Esau is a little gullible. So Jacob sends an advance party just to let Esau know that he's coming home. And when they return, the men tell Jacob that they have indeed seen Esau, and he's on his way with a posse of 400 men. Understandably, as the writer of Genesis says, Jacob is distressed and afraid. Who wouldn't be? After all, you've had 20 years to imagine how awful this day is going to be when you go back home. Jacob again relies on his cunning. He sends gifts fit for a king to Esau, hoping to buy him off. And then he divides his company into two halves, hoping that at least after Esau attacks, one company will survive. And when Esau does finally get there, Jacob protects those he loves the most. Did you notice that he goes in front, bowing 7 times before his brother Esau? Then he sends the maids and their children. Then he sends Leah and her children. And finally, he sends Rachel and his favorite boy, Joseph. Esau, I suspect much to the surprise of Jacob, calls him brother. But Jacob, after all, he's been imagining this for 20 years, calls Esau Lord, as if he's now a servant and no longer a brother. Esau runs to Jacob, throws his hairy arms around him, buries him in a bear hug, lays his head on his shoulder, kisses his brother's neck, and they weep in each other's arms. Yes, it's been 20 years, and much to Jacob's surprise, there is no anger. There is no anger. There is love. Over 20 years. He never imagined a single time that on this day he would be lost in his brother's embrace and there would be love and not anger there. Immediately, Esau wants to move beyond the past and get on living with his brother once again. But Jacob is not ready for that. He can't quite bring himself to reconciliation and restoration despite the love his brother has shown him. But on that day, Jacob does confess. Esau, my brother, when I looked into your face, it was like looking into the very face of God. When I looked into your face, it was like looking into the very face of God. Now remember, at the beginning I said families get messy, even biblical families get messy, and yes, even our own families get messy. And I am wondering today if we can get to the place where Esau and Jacob arrived. Can we possibly get beyond wounds that we have inflicted and received? Can we possibly get beyond anger and animosity and hatred? Can we get beyond threats and fear to an embrace of love? Have we been living far too long with wounds and hostility from our past? Have we literally spent years trying to avoid someone in the market, at Walmart, downtown, who injured us or whom we injured years ago? Have we lived with regrets and shame over what happened a long time ago, convinced that the other person is just as absorbed in their anger and hatred as we are? Have we assumed that broken relationships must always be filled with misunderstanding and hurt, shame and guilt, disdain and anger, seething hatred, and a desire for revenge? Do we think these things are just locked in time and they can never change? Do we live with that soap opera mentality that I learned because when I was a child, my mother watched the world as the world turns in the days of our lives? Are we locked into a soap opera mentality that once a relationship is broken, it must remain broken? In our hearts and our minds, do we ever consider for a single moment that people do let hurts and wounds go? That there are people who do endure hurt and do hurt others, but refuse to allow those moments to define who they are. They refuse to be defined by all that is broken. There are people who in their own way choose, despite the hurt, despite the wounds, despite the anger and the hostility, to move on to life and living. This morning, are we like Jacob and Esau? Are we on the way? Are we like Jacob, always anticipating that anger and hostility and hatred are waiting for us? Or can we entertain for just a little while that what we fear with dread and trembling has already lost its power because the person we are afraid of meeting let it go long, long ago? Can we envision an embrace of love rather than a confrontation filled with anger? Are we ready to forgive and to be forgiven for the sake, for the promise of a new relationship? Do we trust that love, no matter how we might abuse it, do we trust it more than we are afraid? And how many of us are sitting here this morning with memories of the pain of broken relationships, which are hidden in the dark, deep recesses of our minds? And we sit here with them. They're old. Some of them are ancient. But we cannot let them go. How many of us hold on to hurt and anger and fear and never thought for a single moment that the person that we fear, the person we may be holding a grudge against, long, long ago, returned to life and to living? And if we would take just a little initiative, they just might be willing to move beyond the past to a new and fulfilling relationship. They dumped the garbage long ago, and they invite us to dump it too. This story of this family is a messy story with toxic combinations that gave rise to an unspeakable brokenness. But this morning it also has a word of hope for us. For Jacob saw in Esau's face the very face of God. Perhaps we need to hear this loud and clear, that the God of the universe who created all of us, this God is a forgiving God. A God whose steadfast love endures forever. A God who loves us in such a way that absolutely nothing can separate us from His love. Perhaps if we come to grips with this forgiving God, we may discover both the faith and the courage to forgive one another. Perhaps by visiting with this messy biblical family today, we should stop analyzing their dysfunction and meditate for a while on the power of forgiveness. The power of forgiveness to mend and to heal and to offer to us the possibility of reconciliation with one another if we are ready, if we can handle it. In this story of this reunion between Jacob and Esau, there are words that are almost identical to the words we will hear as Jesus tells a story. And in that story, a father runs to a son. The father sees a son and embraces him, kisses him, and they stand there and weep together. Is this the good news that the writer of Genesis and Jesus wants us to hear? God loves and God forgives. God weeps with joy when we trust the power of love and forgiveness to overcome broken relationships. Does Jesus and Genesis want us to remember always that the last word with God is always love? Now, where does this story of this family come to us? Well, because of my role as pastor, because of where I am with people, I often hear people describe the wounds, the hurt, the brokenness of the past. It's all very real. Sometimes things that happened decades ago feel like they just happened yesterday. And there's still tears to be wept and blood to be spilt over what happened long ago. Long, long ago. And in talking with them, they also express a desire for things to be different, for the relationship to be restored, for the promise of something different than what they've lived with for a long, long time. And one of the questions I often ask is, what keeps you from making the phone call? What keeps you from picking up the phone, dialing that person, and trying to find out where things are after all these years? It may not be set in stone. It may have been forgotten. The call might be welcomed. The power of love and hope may usher in forgiveness and reconciliation. What you feared for a long, long time might become good news. And most often, all I get is a shaking head and an expression of fear that things will be this way until the day I die. Well, I want to say, then call up Jacob and see what he can tell you about this. For you just might see the face of God in the person you are afraid to call today.